The Hawker Hurricane was one of the most famous and iconic fighters of World War II. So when the Wingleader team came across two previously unpublished photos of a very early Hurricane with Battle of Britain markings and strange squadron codes, they knew they had to find out more. Little did they realize that this Hurricane would turn out to be one of the most famous Hurricanes ever produced. This is the full illustrated story of L1592. L1592 was the 47th Hurricane to be built by Hawkers and took off from Brooklands for her maiden flight at the end of May 1938. Being a very early example, L1592 looked very different from those that would fight the Battle of Britain just 2 years later. The biggest difference was the lack of ventral fairing under the rear fuselage. The first 100 Hurricanes were delivered like this, with retractable tail wheels. But tests had already shown that the airflow in this area was breaking down, making the bottom half of the rudder ineffective when landing and, more importantly, in a spin. Other distinctive features of these very early Hurricanes were the big, fixed-pitch two-blade wooden propeller, the small Venturi tube under the cockpit to provide a vacuum for the instruments, the kidney exhausts with holes in the sides, and some small extra doors at the top of the undercarriage legs to fill a gap when they were retracted. All of these features would disappear well before the Battle of Britain. On the 3rd of June 1938, L1592 was delivered to 56 Squadron at North Weald, the third operational Hurricane Squadron. But what did she look like then?
Now, there are no known photographs of this aircraft in her very, very early days. So you have to start with a basic early production Hurricane, as you can see here. And then the first question is, what camouflage scheme was she painted in? Was it the A scheme or the B scheme? By studying all the photos of the first 50 Hurricanes, it's clear that all odd-numbered serials had the A camouflage scheme and all even-numbered serials had the B scheme. Now, this did change later on when breaks in the production run interrupted the sequence, but the first 50 definitely followed this pattern. So we applied the B scheme to L1592 like this, and then looked into the rest of the markings. Now, although most early Hurricanes were delivered with aluminium undersides, an experimental batch of 50 from L1576 to L1625 were chosen to trial the new black and white scheme at the request of Fighter Command. Interestingly, the factory misinterpreted the instructions and completed the first 30 or so with just the outer wing panels painted black and white. They were informed of the error and completed the remainder correctly with the black and white paint meeting in the centerline. L1592 was one of the error batch and so looked like this on the undersides.
With the basic factory camouflage scheme complete, Mark then looked into how 56 Squadron painted its Hurricanes in 1938.
Now, we know from records that our Hurricane was the fourth to be delivered to 56 Squadron. And amazingly, we actually have this photo which shows the first three to be delivered. And look, if you look closely, they've got an A, a B and a C just behind the exhausts. Now, I'm going to stick my neck out here, but I reckon that if our Hurricane was the fourth to be delivered, then it probably got the letter D. And if that's the case, then we have a photograph of her here, second in line, with the correct camouflage scheme to back up the theory.
So Mark added the D to the nose and then also introduced the 56 Squadron emblem to the fin in a spearhead, denoting a fighter squadron, and also added speculative flight colours to the aerial mast and spinner tip. Squadrons in the 1930s often painted spinners and other parts in flight colours for quick identification, especially useful when building formations in the air. In September 1938, Europe seemed to be heading for war, and the RAF prepared its aircraft for combat. This photo shows 56 Squadron Hurricanes during that period. The upper wing roundels have been removed, the fuselage roundel toned down, and the serial numbers and emblems have been overpainted. Each squadron also received 2 letter codes to paint on the side of the fuselage, with an instruction to paint the individual letter on the opposite side of the roundel. 56 Squadron peacetime codes were LR, and so our Hurricane would probably have been painted like this. In late July 1939, L1592 was already getting a bit old, so she was passed to 17 Squadron, also at North Weald. After 3 months, she was packed off to France-based 87 Squadron, who immediately sent her back to the UK, possibly because she hadn't been fitted with an armoured windscreen or cockpit armour, which was being introduced to the squadrons in France at the time. After a few more quiet months with 17 Squadron, L1592 was transferred to 43 Squadron, who were based in Scotland for much of spring 1940. Her codes changed to FTC, and it was in this period where our Hurricane was probably brought up to date a little, with several improvements such as a new de Havilland 3-bladed propeller, new ejector exhausts, a vacuum pump to replace the venturi, the ventral fillet of course, and the fitting of an external armoured windshield and armour plate behind the pilot's head and back. With the fall of France in May 1940, many fighter squadrons were moved to the south coast to assist the evacuation at Dunkirk, including 43 Squadron, who arrived at Tangmere on the 31st of May. All aircraft, including L1592, received a yellow ring around the fuselage roundel, a fin flash, and roundels under the wings to aid identification in the combat zone. The next day, L1592 saw combat for the very first time. She was being flown by Pilot Officer Tony Wood-Scowen, who was apparently known as Wombat due to his terrible eyesight. His CO commented that Tony was as brave as a lion and as blind as a bat. Indeed, the story goes that Tony was so desperate to follow his older brother Patrick into the RAF to fly Hurricanes that he memorized the eyesight chart and passed the exam. The squadron managed about 60 NE-109s and ME-110s over Dunkirk, and in the ensuing combat, L1592 was badly hit in the hydraulic system. Tony Wood-Scowen nursed the crippled Hurricane back to Tangmere, where he carried out a successful forced landing. The aircraft was taken away for repair and returned to the front line in mid-July, this time with 615 Squadron at Kenley as KWZ. The only certain change at this point would be for the undersides to be painted in overall sky colour instead of the old black and white skin. Interestingly, there's no record of L1592 flying operationally until about a month later, suggesting that it was treated as a spare airframe because of its age, and probably why it received the last letter of the alphabet as its code. However, on the 16th of August, she was flown in combat by Pilot Officer Looker, who had been a member of the British four-man bobsleigh team that had won the World Championships in 1938. He took her into action again on the 18th of August, but this time wasn't so lucky. In a combat over Sevenoaks, L1592 was hit by ME-109s and plummeted towards Earth. Looker managed to pull out of the spin at 4,000 feet and was just about to bail out when he saw Croydon below and decided to force land. This split-second decision saved L1592 from certain destruction. As he came in over the Purley Road, the ground defences opened fire on him, and the Hurricane ended upon its nose with the pilot unconscious. Luckily, he was rescued from the aircraft just before a bombing raid and spent the next month in hospital. L1592 was also in a very bad state and was dismantled and taken away for extensive repairs and restoration.
Now this is where it gets interesting, because her next appearance is listed with the Christchurch Station Defence flight on the 10th of October 1940. The flight's codes were ZQ, which are the codes she's wearing in the newly discovered photos. And just to confirm it, this photo shows our Hurricane on a local flight over Bournemouth. That strip of land in the distance is easily identifiable as sandbanks. So I worked up a profile based on the photos, and just have a look. During the last restoration, the repair factory totally repainted the aircraft from the B scheme to the A scheme. Now this might seem a bit odd, but if the fabric on the wings and the fuselage needed to be renewed, then the factory probably chose to paint it in the most convenient scheme at the time. The aircraft also now has a standard fin flash and even has IFF Mark II aerial wires fitted from the tailplane to the fuselage. Now there's also a final modification that isn't immediately apparent. L1592 suffered 2 undercarriage collapses whilst at Christchurch. Now this is the accident card for the first of those incidents, which happened on the 22nd of December 1940, just after landing. You can see in the engine section that L1592 had traded her old Merlin 2 engine in for a Merlin 3. We have absolutely no idea when that happened, but undoubtedly during one of the repair sessions.
And so L1592's active service came to an end. In August 1941, she left Christchurch and did the usual rounds of training units and repair shops until August 1944, when some clever person at the Air Historical Branch recognised her significance and designated her for museum preservation, a very unusual occurrence in wartime.
Now this is how she looked at that point. As you can see, the brown has been replaced by grey. It's got late war roundels and fin flashes, and I have absolutely no idea what's going on with the rudder. That probably is a replacement rudder. So here is the comparison between the 1938 L1592 and the 1945 L1592. There's quite some changes, eh?
So what happened to L1592? Well, she became a film star in the 1952 film Angels 1-5, and then she was repainted in the colours she wore with 615 Squadron in 1940. Airfix even made a model of her in these colours. And you can go and see her today, as she now hangs proudly in the Science Museum in London. There's hardly anything original of her left, except perhaps the aerial mast and the pilot's seat. But that's quite fitting really, as these museum pieces are there to remind us, first and foremost, of the brave men who sat in that seat during the war. David Looker recovered from his injuries and returned to 615 Squadron on the 30th of September 1940. He subsequently became a flying instructor in Canada and retired from the RAF in 1945 as a flight lieutenant. He passed away in 1995. Tony Wood-Scowen continued to cause mayhem wherever he flew, shooting down 7 German aircraft and being shot down himself on 6 occasions. He was once again hit on 2nd of September 1940, and with his aircraft rapidly falling apart, he bailed out. But this time, he was too low, and his parachute failed to open. Wombat was killed instantly. He was just 22 years old. His older brother Patrick had shot down 10 German aircraft, but had been missing for 24 hours before Tony's death. Patrick's body was found 5 days later in an overgrown garden near Kenley. His parachute had also failed to open. Several months later, the boy's still grieving and broken father went to Buckingham Palace to receive DFCs for both of his sons from the King himself.